Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I'm going to do a short review today, a book that I read down here in the Dominican Republic on the beach, and that was The Goat Castle Murders by Michael Llewellyn. This is an historical novel based on a true life story of a woman named Jane Merrill who was murdered in her mansion when she was 68 or 70. I can't quite remember the exact age she was when she was killed. And she was killed in 1932, and it was quite the headline news at the time because she was a relatively wealthy recluse living in her mansion. She did have a long-term lover, her second cousin named Duncan, and they never married. They did not marry because Duncan's mother was dead set against the Merrill family and that they were second cousins. I think the second cousin part was a little less of an issue rather than her family hated the Merrill family and did not want them joined together. So they had a very long-term love affair. Now this novel starts when Jane is 19, and she is just coming back from Europe. During the Civil War, her father basically sympathized with the Yankee North, and so all the residents of Natchez, Mississippi distrusted and disliked him for that. And he invited General Grant over to his house to dine shortly afterwards, and that really infuriated the citizens of Natchez. So he was experiencing a lot of trouble with the residents. But when Grant became president, he granted Jane's father an ambassadorship to Belgium. And so Jane spent most of her youth growing up in Europe, and originally thought she was going to marry a count. But when her father became ill, he was sent back to live his remaining years in his hometown of Natchez. So she's traveling on a steamboat and meets a character, a journalist named Stephen, and he strikes up a conversation with her, and he wants to interview her because she seems to be fascinating, this family returning to Mississippi, but she doesn't want to really grant an interview, but she keeps in contact with him. And so what happens is her father dies a few years later, and during those years when her father was alive, she was reestablishing the reputation of the Merrill family by fancy soirees in their great big mansion. Now, Natchez, Mississippi, before the Civil War, was a very wealthy town. All the rich plantation owners wanted a mansion in Natchez, and it was known as just being the place where rich people built their homes and lived. But after the war, it started going into decline. But when she returned, when she was 19, and that was still in 1990 something, she was trying to reestablish the reputation of her mansion. And there she met up with her second cousin, Duncan, and they were quite infatuated with each other, and Duncan wanted to marry her, but Duncan's mother said, "You are absolutely not marrying into the Merrill family," because their family disliked the Merrills and that they were second cousins. I think the second cousin issue was a little bit less than the families just didn't like each other. So what happened was when her father died, she packed up and moved to New York City to do some charity work. And in New York City, she reestablished contact with that journalist, Stephen. And Jane was very concerned with what was known as baby farms in New York City, the immigrant areas that were desperately poor. And one of the things Michael Llewellyn does do good is describe the environment. And these slums were just a horrible place to live, as they said, unfit for animals. and there was an issue with unwed mothers giving birth to babies, and there was some relief funds going out, and disreputable organizations were taking money for these unwed babies, but not really taking care of the babies. So Jane was involved with the people in the slums, and she invited Stephen to go down and speak with one of these women. And when they were down there, they came across a grisly murder. A man who was so desperately poor that he could not feed his own family decided the best thing that he could do was kill them. And they came across that family shortly after he's murdered them and almost killed Jane and Stephen. So after that, Jane decided to give up her charity work and go back to Natchez. And shortly after that, she officially started her affair with Duncan, very illicit. And Duncan would ride out to her house in the middle of the night on horseback in secret. The only problem was it was a very open secret. He was probably the only person other than Jane who did not know that their affair was basically common knowledge. And it goes on from there. Jane is eventually evicted from her family mansion because her elder siblings got into some bad debt and sold the house out from under her. And after that, she became a recluse and would only let Duncan visit her. And that was for many years. She started the main affair in her late 20s. She was evicted from her home in her 30s, and living as a recluse lasted into her late 60s and early 70s when she got murdered. Now, the official murderer was a African-American hobo who was accused of robbery, murder and robbery. However, he himself, and I'm just telling you the historical facts, is that this case was never really officially solved. There was lots of disputes. So when this author went down to investigate this book and think about writing the novel, he started talking to the residents of Natchez. And they all said, well, you know, it's not officially solved, but blah, 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 blah. And those residents had opinions about the murder, and the African-American hobo who was the official listing of the person who probably killed her. And so this author fictionalized the novel. He mentions that there's a lot he does not know, so there is definitely some fiction. He definitely tries to keep, or I think he pretty much does keep, to the historical facts of this murder. But he does solve the murder. Of course, whether his solution is the real solution is a subject the reader is going to have to decide for his or herself. I thought it was very well done. He does really good work describing the environment, because the houses in Natchez, many of them fall into disrepair. There's a just hilarious scene of Duncan, who is a tightwad. He does not want to fix his own home. When a leak develops in his bedroom over his bed, he just moves his bed and lets the leak continue, because he doesn't care, because he's spending every night with Jane. And he lets the front porch disintegrate until one of the servants falls through the steps, the rotted planks that make up the steps going up to the porch. And he just puts a ladder over the hole and says, just walk over the ladder. I don't want to spend money to repair this house. And then there are neighbors who move in across from Jane. This is a woman named Octavia, and she, again, is historical. She was slated to be the first woman to ever go to Antarctica. She was going to be the journalist in charge of Antarctica and describing all their findings and all their doings. But the funding for that Antarctic expedition never came through. And she eventually falls into dire poverty. And her poverty is just so extreme. The house is falling around her. She originally wanted to write poetry, but she gave up poetry to farm the land and raise livestock, including goats. And at one point, in their 40s or their 50s, one of Octavia's goats escapes from her property and goes into Jane's property and eats some of her prized azaleas. So Jane does the only sensible thing and shoots the goat, which starts basically a feud between two households. And Octavia is taking care of a man named Richard Dana. He is related to the Richard Henry Dana who wrote the seafaring memoir 2 years before Mast. And it goes on through that. So if you like murder mysteries, especially historical murder mysteries, I can say this is a pretty good book to read. It's never going to be one of my top favorites of all time, but it was a very enjoyable book to read on my Kindle on the beach in the Dominican Republic. Now, I'm not sure if I can upload this video down here in the Dominican Republic. The internet connection is not the best because I'm not paying for high-speed internet. So this may actually have to be uploaded after I return to the United States. But give this book a shot. It's well worth it. It's very cheap on Kindle. It's like $2.99. So go ahead and read Goat Castle Murder by Michael Llewellyn. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.